I tempted fate with my health by going into Seattle on a cold day and mingling with the flimsy mask. My voice is raw. It doesn't yet signify any kind of illness. It's just I've been out in the cold for a long time today. But I'm going to try to discuss something with you. I, we're open with a somewhat fatalistic remark. I realize that it's highly unlikely that anybody mature and adult is going to try to understand the non rhetorical, factual, not sophistry that I bring to the table with the subject matter that I offer. Because the mature adults in the room oblige the wizard of sacred truth and reality and absolute sincerity by allowing him to imply such things as that being kidnapped on a snowy day and screaming from suffering and an impacted neuroplasm is date rape, and that the prosaic elements of the poem Dover Beach signify defiant trespass. You can't get much further from truth, and yet this sorcerer claims that truth is his absolute calling. So much for my fatalism. One of my hearing aids has a new battery, which doesn't always work right away, so I'm fidgeting with it. What I want to do is address the prospect of making the situation understood to somebody who didn't live through it. One of the things I have recently acquired is a book called Generation Z Explained. I have lost track of the new generations. I thought everybody who wasn't me was millennial. Well, okay. I'm a 60s kid by default. I grew up as a 9-year-old watching the hippie movement, the anti-war movement, and the war in Vietnam. And then they, dangled a carrot in front of my nose while I was a little boy. So one of the things I know they did was they created a parchment of language signifiers from MIT or wherever, Library of Congress, governors, hooligans on high. And they came up with this idea of a fork in the road, okay? They actually lanced my pecker when I was 9 years old, so that pees in two directions. He pees with forked tongue they gave me notes like I think you understand what I'm saying. And it's just stuff that comes down the pipeline from the Republican apparatus. There's a fork in the road. Now, so what this concept tape is about, it is a concept tape, is the fork in the road that they mean and the fork in the road that actually exists. Now, I want to oblige Robert Kennedy some uh, suspension of disbelief when he says that he wants to avoid confrontation, divisive politics, that the survivors' guilt that we all feel from what we've been going through should be converted into survivors' responsibility because it's a transformation. So what I'll do is I'll address him as the other in this matter because I oppose him strenuously. The idea that pragmatics in electoral college necessities requires his bizarre lampoon of dissembling that led him to say nothing about the outrage visited on Gaza. Okay, what I want to do is show you what the real fork in the road is. But before I do that, I'll just go through what their fork in the road is. When I was in love with Rosa, They came up from below with Vince Irini and above with Peter Gabriel and Prince Thorles. And they have this, if you look at Greta Thunberg's social movement, you see young, brave kids. They haven't been beaten half to death and put through trauma. Being arrested and going to, one of them says she's going to prison. It causes me a great deal of indignity and surprise that the British authorities would put a girl like that, a conscientious student, on a field trip of civil disobedience in prison. Bah humbug to those Sunaks. The Sunaks are some kind of Dr. Zeus character. Sunak Nunak, Sunak Nunak. Well, what happens is the ability to willingness to get arrested becomes lionized, and you have fakers on the bed of nails like Vince Irini getting carted away at every boo Iraq or boo Bush. And the wise beards of the NAACP say, he's got the stuff, right? And then this one here, he's after the pussy. Now, I might break your heart to use that kind of language, but this was coming from above and below while we were having a hysteria about a cowardly attack called AIDS that was ripping and rewrapping mink and shiny silver fox and turning them into leg warmers. And there was a whole hysterical subculture selling this idea that the script was magnificently composed as a form of art statement that would bring together the people who undid the Berlin Wall. And we would never tell about the secret deal. It would all be held hush hush and private around the idea of a fork in the road. I wondered, they're saying, oh, all he ever wanted was a Shetland pony. And it's all scripted into Bewitched. And they give me this mercenary deal on a girl who I fell in love with, and she gets pregnant, and they spat her to school with the abortion. Why would DeSantis do that? I wanted my child. I wanted my son, Benito. Because they want to tear my heart out and have me from the opposition, the liberal who didn't fear God enough to come forward and atone for my sin and say, I believe Donald Trump is right that we must ban abortion. That's for other people to decide. Bottom line. It's not for me to decide. I can't decide that. But that's their fork in the road. I told you what if your health matters, I'll tell you why it's a good idea to stop out of wedlock. First, but look at how they did it. They made me so afraid that I was going to die the next day. They kidnapped me out of school. They tortured me. They gassed me. And then they gave me this boom-bim-bish-boom-bim. And I wanted to taste the fruits of pleasure before I was murdered. And she wanted me to. We were both Annabelle Lee, And so this is what they did. But really, a person of stature would have said, you're supposed to live to be 90. And you need to understand that the force of creation confounds your judgment. Not go sticking hot wires in, pouring LSD and pepper on the brain, making people sick in the head deliberately. That's not what an upstanding person does. And you say you have to be very careful. It's better to understand the other, be romantically involved. They say, no, that's for the seeker warriors of the Catholic Church to teach the purposefully included, because we're going to get rid of the excluded. And they have a movie from Africa where everybody spits on this guy and calls him exclu. And I was suspicious. What the hell is going on? Then we have an epidemic. We need to stop embettering people to tune out. And then I thought, I know what they're going to do. They're going to set up traps. They're going to put out a little bit of sniff for the quad thing and a bear trap. And that's what they did. And they were even more sophisticated. They were intoning a narrative over it. They had a script, for heaven's sakes. So there's a fork in the road, okay? You get the fork in the road. We need parochial education everywhere. No, I would say the minimum we need to do a better job of explaining these things. They don't want that's their fork in the road to say, Ronald Reagan didn't know, and we did the best with the best we could. Okay, now let's get to the actual fork in the road, because that's complicated because it's cahooters with the leapfrog oligarchs. Zelensky and Putin and Oliver Stone are all setting it up. Okay, so that's the leapfrog oligarchy. And the International Criminal Court has no jurisdiction or power over the leapfrog oligarchy. So they don't want the narrative to get around. They don't want it to survive at all. It's theological. It comes from Pitt's theological people, philosophy. You can have the truth, and if it's so valuable to you, go ahead, but you'll be killed. So what I want to do is talk about a culture where that was pernicious and explain to you why I don't think it's inherent in Russia and why Václav Havel is somewhat to blame for bringing us to this past. And that's going to be a complicated show because the Velvet Revolution was actually about a slow gestation of the precursors of progress under the Russian occupation of Czech Republic, when it was still Czechoslovakia, before Slovakia broke off. Prague Spring in 1968 took place about the time of the Revolution number 9, when it killed Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, which was April and June of 1968. Then on November 22nd, 1968, the perpetrators put out the White Album. And we're supposed to say, oh no, this is a spiritual legacy of the connectivity of beyond this, that their staged and phony intercept resulted in. Okay, so, we don't want any of that explanation for the linguistic anthropology jazz of names like Casper. You just accept that that's there. Okay, but I believe what I've written is a better idea, that you have to have this movement of people who preserve the identity structure of what's actually going on. And Ivan Spytek was like that. When I read him, he was in the occupied Russia, Czechoslovakia, occupied by the Soviet Union. And before I say one other thing, don't bring in all the alarmist boogie monsters. I know about the gulags. Day in Life of Evelyn Janetsovich has one of the best lines I've ever seen in literature, if not the best. How difficult it is for a warm man to appreciate the concerns of a cold man. I mean, if everybody got that through their head, had it on the refrigerator, we'd live in a much better world. Okay, and the reason I don't want to get into that jazz is because the Soviet Union eventually let go because of the Samizdat movement. But back in 68 and 70, when Ivan Spytek was writing under the occupation, there was a strange sort of half-truth feeling to what he was saying. He dared say only so much. And that's the gridlock that these war mechanics are trying to put over our entire heritage and legacy and history as a forge that you may not ever question. And it's the old Soviet Union, the ruthless old guard at work with people like Trumpington. And that's not healthy. But it's important to remember that Russia were the ones who were abandoning the liberation movement, partly because maybe this was going on behind the scenes. I don't know. But my resistance to George Bush came from the fact that he immediately seized on the opportunity to lie to the Russians, claim they weren't going to invade Ukraine by their powers of bribery and corruption, and encircle Russia, which is the situation we have. That's a curtain call, but we have to remember that we're dealing with Hollywood people, people who are very good at manipulating the shows and dramas on this stage. Remember, Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage? Well, what Greta's movement needs to understand is the fork in the road has to do with preservation of the past and explanation to the future. And they keep getting arrested on the roads. I have told them over and over again that they know as well as I do that the problem is in media. That's where the problem is. The problem isn't that the people need to have drummed into their heads the doctrine of faith and science. That's disputable. Bobby Kennedy is all over that. The earth looks after itself sometimes better than we look after it. But the nurture of the Extinction Rebellion, the people in the Congo and agroforestry, the people who understand tree recovery and arid regions that need to be reinvested in for the botanical life that they can habituate, are all real issues of learning and knowledge, but it's restricted to a small group of people because of the media. The media doesn't even tell people that if you read those books, you'll see we're really in an emergency. So you should be reading those books, much less do they read the books themselves and put together a presentation of sustainable development goals. How hard is that? Every single person on the world should know SDG stands for Sustainable Development Goals. How many people in your community group know what it means? If you said SDG, they'd say, huh? So these people, instead of blocking roads, I mean, I'm not against blocking roads when it comes to I feel badly for these people who are getting arrested on civil disobedience field trips and coming up against Sunak Nunaks. But they should be holding the sit-down strikes at the media where it matters. This was the sort of thing that was going on behind the scenes in the occupation. We need to be able to tell the broadcast. We need to be able to persuade the broadcasters that it's worth the risk to them to allow Czech partisans to explain their point of view and why it would be better for everyone if Russia stopped the occupation. Now, Václav Havel was a parliamentarian who refused to leave. He lived in arrest. And the Russians came to admire him because of his ability to speak the language of reconciliation. I never tire of my favorite play, where there's a man in the party, like a Yanukovych, who was the president of Ukraine before the coup d'etat by the neocons from America. He was concerned for the same thing that the man circulating the petition was. A third man was under arrest, and the petition was about. And the petition man said, "Please sign the petition." And he said, the party member, the Yanukovych, says, "Look, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to get mobilization to get him out of prison, but I can't put my name on it because it's too close to home. I'm in the party. I'll get in too much trouble." And the play argues between them. But if Havel had the mind of a Red Scare maniac, he would have made it a goblin. He didn't sign it. The petition got him free. Now we must strike. He didn't do that. The backroom deals with the party member would ultimately get the man freed. He humanized the situation across the lines. And Václav Havel bolts to Bush. And I was like, you can't be serious. Ivan Swiatek comes to California and says they were all appalled. They thought it was so great from Prague Spring. But when I told them the Czechoslovakian partisans were largely Marxism, that Marxism is beautiful, they treated me like Galileo telling the church that the Earth revolved around the sun rather than vice versa. And Bush was always saying, we're going to get it through Galileo's fat head, one way or another. The Red Scare is the center of the universe. The Red Scare isn't the center of the universe. It's stupid stuff. So the forks in the road are twofold. One of them is we can go to Marshall, we're overpopulating supposedly. We're overcrowded supposedly. These people, these dramaturgs want us to see abortion in the buried children of Gaza's rubble. Like that must kill Clouseau guy. Remember, there's always some sort of magical. Yeah, they don't know witchcraft from mysticism. It's all a bunch of bunk. But somebody please, stop picking on me about abortion. I wanted my child. So anyway, and don't pick on Gaza for God's sakes for this stupid thing, DeSantis. Anyway, and the other fork in the road is, do we want to be like Oz and Bartok, cautiously, carefully dissembling about what happened? Or do we want to be upfront and admit it? I mean, I already know the answer because I've seen what Pittsburgh and Seattle do when they operate together. They're worse than Oz and Bartok. They're some sort of grandiose goblin warlock situation. I don't know, Jimmy Hoffa stuff.